Trudeau grilled by allies over NATO commitment. Poilievre won't commit to NATO 2% target. This is the Grey White North Report. So everyone knows that last week Trudeau went to a big NATO summit with all member countries, and he was mercilessly grilled by his allies because Canada is in the bottom tier of contributions to NATO. The 2% benchmark is your GDP. Canada does spend a lot of money on defense, but not compared to GDP. It's a bit different. It depends on the size of your economy and stuff like that. Some countries get the 2% benchmark, but they don't have as big of a GDP. It's all about math crunching. But the fact is, Canada does need to boost military spending and modernize our military right now. We need new submarines. There's no question about that. We need new tanks. We need new artillery. We need an air defense system. We need many things. And it's not just Trudeau and the Liberals. It goes all the way down the pipeline. I think the biggest mistake Canada made was back in the 60s when we decided to go with peacekeeping as our primary objective in the military. And that has made the military hardware kind of obsolete and has been slowly being phased out over the previous decades. The end of the Cold War didn't help that either because there was no longer seen to be a need for a big military back when the Soviet Union finally fell. China was not perceived as a big threat. They were so far behind technologically. And most threats were from little groups like the PLO and stuff like that. The Iranians were still a thorn, but not really the Canadian. So the NATO alliance was almost dissolved in one sense because it was thought to be not necessary anymore. So Trudeau was under intense pressure from allies to ramp up investments in defense. And Trudeau countered that we can continually step up and punch above our weight, something that was always reflected in the crass mathematical calculation on certain people turned to very quickly, which is why we've always questioned the 2% as the be-all, end-all of evaluating contributions to NATO. Meanwhile, he already agreed to that 2% benchmark himself. So now it's time to follow through. But he's saying that we will reach it by 2032. So he's pushing it down the road. He is. 20's not even going to be here, so he doesn't care. He doesn't think he'll be here in 2032. And I don't think he will either. So he delivered that timeline with few details. Trudeau said the goal will be met by investing in new defense capabilities such as submarines, which are not yet cost or approved, which means we haven't even looked at new submarines yet. We haven't been looking at how much they cost, who we're going to go with, and nothing's been approved yet. And which is typical of Canadian governments. There's way too much bureaucracy and our procurement system takes too long. There's too much red tape and it needs to be cut. Now one has to remember that Trudeau's own philosophy towards foreign affairs and the military. Trudeau believes in soft power. He thinks that working with allies and putting diplomatic pressure on would-be characters looking to start fires is the best way to go, or sanctions. He thinks sanctions against Russia will bring it down. Sanctions didn't bring down the Japanese. In fact, they had the opposite during World War II. The United States sanctioned oil imports from the United States to Japan, and so what did Japan do? They started invading southward towards Indonesia in order to gain oil fields. Things like that will happen. That's why Putin has reached out to North Korea. He's reaching out more to China. They already have Iran. He's reaching out to India, who's not part of NATO. Containment only works so much. So he thinks that soft power will do that. But soft power didn't work during the Kovrig-Spavor crisis with Meng the Merciless, Guangzhou. Trudeau leaned on his allies to help him out, and it didn't work for 2 years. The United States, under Biden, finally let her go after she paid a huge fine. And Kovrig and Spavor were part of the deal. I think Trudeau did little to help out Kovrig and Spavor as well as Canadians, because remember, the Chinese Communist Party started putting bans on imports of Canadian beef and canola into China. We did absolutely nothing to hit back at the Chinese Communist Party at the time, when we could have. We could have raised tariffs on all their imports to us, We could have seized lots of property held by Chinese communist members in Canada. And we could have thrown Ming the Merciless into a real prison instead of having her under house arrest. There are a lot of ways we could have did that. But no, Trudeau did nothing, and it showed how weak he was to the Chinese Communist Party. He goes by the rule of law. He thinks all countries should follow the rule of international law. They don't. Most countries, if they can get away with something, they will. Since when has North Korea, Iran, or China ever used international law except for when it's in their benefit? But also, Justin gets it from his father, Pierre. Pierre didn't see any use for the military himself. Pierre Trudeau never was 19 years old at the start of World War II. He never served in the Canadian Army. In fact, he actively participated in protest against conscription when it became a thing in World War II, when Canada needed more men to serve. Supposedly after the war, Pierre had a change of heart when he saw how brutal it really was, but that doesn't stop the fact that he was not in World War II, never served his country. And how we elected him, I don't know why. But Pierre was also not a fan of the military. He scrapped our aircraft carrier when it was after it had been refitted. $350 million refit to the aircraft carrier, the Bonnie Venture. And then he scraps it. He was going to pull our tank brigade out of West Germany at the time in 1980. The West German Chancellor said, "No tanks, no trade." So Pierre kept it in there for a while longer until the end of the Cold War era. So that's where Trudeau gets his thinking from. His father and soft power. His father befriended dictators in China. He befriended Castro and other less savory characters as well, in order to kind of get away from the United States influence, I guess. But still, it made his allies uncomfortable that he was going there. And this Trudeau makes his allies uncomfortable. They don't know if they can trust him. So right now we have 1.3% of our GDP for the military. Plan to reach 1.76 by the end of the decade. Again, 6 years down the road. In other words, we can't commit to anything. Canada politically is pretty broke right now. Under Justin economics or Trudeau economics, Canada has spent so much money and we have so much more national debt now than we did before. Now, Bill Blair, he defended the slow pace of Canada's defense spending. Says some allies have it easier. Yeah, some allies like Latvia, Estonia, and Poland have the Russians right next door to them pretty much. Only thing stopping the Russians from going after Poland is Belarus and the little bit of Kaliningrad they have on the Baltic coast. We are in the midst of another Cold War, whether people like it or not. China and Russia are going to push the envelope. They're going to see what they can get. They're going to bully who they can. The Russian invasion of Ukraine is going into its third year, and it's been a complete disaster for the Russians. As far as, although there is no victory yet, it's been pretty Pyrrhic. The Russians have lost so many men and so much men and material. Putin reached out to North Korea probably for more help in securing weapons for his military, ammunition stockpiles, but I also wouldn't be surprised to see North Korean soldiers start appearing in the fight, because Putin's going to need soldiers. He's running out of convicts. There was even some African soldiers fighting. So I wouldn't be surprised if you start seeing North Korean volunteers or even Chinese People's Liberation Army volunteers fighting in Ukraine. Wouldn't surprise me at all. And that'll raise the stakes even more. So Bill Blair said it's not about showing up at your local military trade show with a credit card and buying a whole bunch of stuff. You need money for that too, which we don't have. But there are arms shows, and you can start looking at stuff and trying to make a contract to bid on things. But our procurement system means that we have to have so many people. We have to put out that we want this, and you have so much time for people to come with their stuff, and we'll look at it and then bid on it on a contract, something like that. I didn't say it so eloquently. And then once we choose the winning bidder, then we'll go and make it. But there's always red tape, because somebody who loses the bid will then sue the government to try and get it overturned. It happened with the fighter project and with the frigate project. So we're going to need new capabilities. The new defense policy suggests that we're only possibilities. So nothing is set in stone. New equipment such as submarines, an integrated air and missile defense system for Canada, North America, ground-based air defenses to protect critical infrastructure from the kinds of attacks launched on Ukraine's electricity grid. Think about that, all the electric cars that they want to put on. All it takes is going to be a strike on the electrical grids to put those out of commission. Long-range surface-to-surface and sea-launched missiles, modern and mobile artillery, and new tanks. There's a lot of stuff. The problem is we've designed a lot of light armor vehicles, labs, but we haven't produced any tanks ourselves. We got General Dynamics and Armantech, who produce light armor vehicles. Let them start developing a tank. It's not that much of a step up. They're going to move forward with a new fleet of up to 12 submarines. I like that. I'm all for that. We need to build them fast, though, or we buy them off the shelf from some other country, which will probably be faster. I've always argued that we need a fourth or fifth shipyard because we only have one shipyard right now that's currently building military type vessels. That's the one in Halifax, but they're right now building the last of the Arctic patrol ships, and those are the Coast Guard variants, which are very lightly armed. Davy in Quebec is only building Coast Guard variants as well, I believe, and a supply ship. I'd have to go back and look at that, and so does the one in BC. C-SPAN, they're building the supply ship plus a whole bunch of Coast Guard variants. We need another military shipyard. I suggested St. John's, New Brunswick, and St. John's, Newfoundland as two possible candidates. You could even build these in Toronto. They used to build in Toronto. World War II, we were building naval corvettes out in Collingwood, Ontario. So, somewhere, and that would also stimulate the local economy. And if they're successful, you can sell them abroad to our allies. And the procurement is the biggest problem, the red tape. Like the acquisition of the fully operational maritime helicopter and fixed-wing search and rescue plane took decades. It did. It took decades to replace the Sea King helicopters. When we went to replace our original Oberon submarines, we went cheap and bought used submarines from the UK, and they've been nothing but a dumpster fire. They've cost way more to fix and maintain than they're worth. The F-35 program, we were in on the development of that under Harper. We were all set to buy it, go with it. Trudeau, one of his election promises was to scrap it for some reason and go with something else, and then he came right back to the same goddamn plane. So that's a waste of time and money, and because they cost more now than they did back in 2016. So Poilievre, he's not going to commit to 2% target because he's got a dumpster fire of a budget balance. Conservatives love to try and balance the budget, and it's going to be hard. I hope he does try and reach that 2% target myself. But he is right. The Liberals have overspent on many social programs. Like, people should not look for the government to help them in their everyday life. You have to help yourself. Because government is usually inefficient and creates more bureaucracy. The Canadian government is far bigger now than it was 10 years ago. There's too much bureaucracy. Cut down the bureaucracy. I'm more Jeffersonian, even though he was a U.S. guy. And he who governs best governs least. Unfortunately, Jefferson also believed the militia could handle any fight, so he didn't invest money in the military. I don't agree with that one. But Poilievre says he's not going to make a promise that I can't keep. And right now, as a country, we're broke. He says every time he makes a financial commitment, he's going to make sure he pulled out his calculator and did all the math. So he's right. He's tired of politicians announcing they're going to spend money without figuring out how they're going to pay for it. And that's what happened in the Trudeau years. Poilievre did say that his plan to boost defense spending hinges on cutting funding to dictators, terrorists, and multinational bureaucracies. What he's referring to is our foreign aid. We spend $6.5 billion on foreign aid this year alone. And in the past, we have given money to China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, Pakistan, India, Afghanistan, Somalia, the West Bank and Gaza, so UNRWA. We can stop funding UNRWA again. I would never resume funding. But Poilievre is right. We no longer need to spend money on dictators, terrorists, and multinational bureaucracies, as well as criminal governments like Haiti. That's been a dumpster fire. So he wants Poilievre promises to buy equipment based on best value to make our money go further, and would replace the military's woke culture with a warrior culture to boost recruitment. And he's quite right. I have 3 cousins and a niece in the military, and my 3 cousins tell me that wokeness has gone too far. They had a military witch hunt, the Me Too movement of all the top commanders in order to get a woman in charge. That's the other thing about Trudeau. He's all about the woke stuff, equality and inclusion. Well, equality and inclusion are not always the best recipe for competent. And in the case of military, that's the wrong way to go. That's almost caused the fall of the Soviet Union back in World War II, because they went with political reliability in their military commanders over military competence or skill. The Chinese People's Liberation Army and the North Korean Army, they're all about political reliability over military skill. And that's what Canada has right now, I think. But we'll see. Like Harper, he canceled a lot of stuff. He decreased the military budget. Well, Trudeau did that last year. He was looking to cut cost, so he pulled money from the defense. They had to pull so much money out. And when you don't have enough money to buy things or to do things that you would like to do, that's what happens. So we'll see. I expect Poilievre to be the next prime minister of a minority government, probably. So I don't think that many people in the urban areas are going to swing conservative. And that's where the main stronghold of the Liberals is. In the urban areas of Toronto and Montreal and Vancouver. Personally, I like to see Canada rebuild its military. I know, get as close to the 2% benchmark as possible. Not by 2032 though. And start revitalizing our military. Remember, our new frigates aren't going to even be in the water for another 3 years. At least. Maybe longer. 2030 is what I saw last time. Like I said, they're building the 2 Coast Guard variants in Halifax, and then they're going to start the frigates. So by 2026, 2027, they're going to start building our new frigates. And we won't see one until 2030. But anyway, Canadians out there, let me know what you guys think of the NATO commitment. Should we be reaching our 2% goals? Should we be getting rid of all the red tape and bureaucracy? Is Poilievre right that it won't be feasible given our current economic situation? Leave comments in the comment section. Subscribe if you're new to the channel. Until next time, this has been the Great White North Report.